Hi, this is Ant from Speakerstack Music. This YouTube channel is dedicated to providing Ableton music tutorials, music production techniques, videos that outline how to create songs in different musical genres, and how to go about creating, recording and producing your own music and then putting that music online and out there for the world to listen to. So this is an introduction to Ableton video. I'm going to be outlining the broad features of Ableton so that you have a general overview of what it does, what those main features are and how it works. I'm then going to be provided further videos which will go in and break down each of those sections of Ableton, and I will do that by creating a song from scratch. So we'll actually start to use the different sections of Ableton and get to know what those are through the very process of creating a song from start to finish. And I will break down that song creation into a series of bite-sized chunks that will each deal with each of the main instruments within the song. So, without further ado, let's dive into Ableton. So when you open Ableton up, this is essentially what you will see. You'll see that there are various different boxes and sections, and each of those sections relates to a different aspect of the music production process. So the main section here is where you will drop in all your instruments that you'll be using in that particular song. And you'll see that there are horizontal boxes, and those horizontal boxes each correspond to a specific instrument within the track you're working with, within the song that you're working with. Over on this side, you have your mixing, production and mastering channels, and these are used towards the end of the creative process, when you have recorded and written all the sounds into the song, and when you want to actually start to produce the track and make it have a certain sound or feel. So these two channels here are your return channels, and this is where you drop in effects that you will apply as parameters to one or more different instruments within the song, but where you don't necessarily want to apply that effect to the entirety of the song. And then the final instrument channel is your master channel, and this is where you will drop in effects that you want to apply to the entirety of the song as a universal parameter to kind of bind together the sound in a particular way. In this section down here, and there isn't anything in it at the moment because we haven't got that far in the song yet, but this is where you will see the particular instrument that you have in that instrument chat track. So if you were to click on the first instrument channel in the song, which I have here, which is number 1, which you haven't labeled yet, and then hover down here, you would actually then see the instrument and effects that you've applied to that particular instrument in the song. Similarly, if you clicked on this, you might have a whole new set of different instruments and effects drop down here that you would then be able to see and work with. The other main section is on the far left, and you get to it by clicking on this arrow here. I'll just close down this box here so you can see it better. This is essentially your library of sounds. So think of it as a set of files that you have loaded into Ableton that you can access and drop into the song to give you a certain instrument or a certain effect or a certain sound. And so in these drop down boxes you have your library of instruments, you have your library of sounds, and you have your library of effects. Another useful feature of Ableton is the info view. So if you click on the arrow in the bottom left hand corner, you bring up the info view panel, which gives you a description of that particular section or button or feature of Ableton that you're hovering over with your mouse. So I'd recommend that you have that on when you're first starting out in Ableton. The other thing to mention that I did forget earlier, actually, just looking at just talking about the main view, is that you, with these instrument channels, you actually have two different types of channel. You have MIDI channels and you have audio channels. MIDI channels are designed for your virtual instruments, so those instruments that are digital and virtual within Ableton. So that's samples of instruments or samples of sounds. The audio channels are designed for when you're recording an instrument live into Ableton, such as some vocals or a guitar. So it's actually when you're actually playing the instrument live into Ableton as a performance to capture that particular sound. So that's an important distinction in terms of the two different types of channels that you will be using. And when you're working within the song, you'll need to decide what type of channel you want to drop in there in preparation for the right kind of instrument that you want to put in there. So one of the really cool things about Ableton is that you'll see that we've opened up Ableton and we've got the tracks and the instruments going down vertically in a line across the screen like this. What we're actually looking at is a particular view or way of working within Ableton, which is known as the session view. There is actually a second way of looking at the tracks in the instruments within Ableton and a second way of working within it. And if you click on the button up here, you actually change the view to what's known as the arrangement view, which is a different way of working with Ableton, and they're both useful for different things. So the arrangement view that we have open at the moment is a way of looking at your song in a linear fashion, almost like a piece of sheet music where there's a start at this end and a finish further down the track. And you'll see along the bottom you actually have a timeline which corresponds to the number of seconds and minutes that have passed as part of the song. The session view is a far more fluid and flexible way of building up a song structure. So each of these boxes that you have within a particular instrument track would correspond to a loop of sound, a block and a loop of sound that will just spin round and round and round as you trigger it. And you trigger it on the right hand side here using these arrows. So in the session view, I think the session view is probably a fantastic view for a beginner to use, because essentially what it enables you to do is to just drop loops of sound in. You can start to play around with those loops of sound, and you can actually start to structure the track. And you build it up vertically. So you might have in this instrument you might have a drum kit, and that first section might be an intro fill on that kit, and then you might have the rhythm and the beat that you would want to have in the next part of the song on that line, and then you might have a different rhythm and beat for the next part of the song on that line. And so you can start to build up the song as a series of loops, almost like Lego bricks, is how I like to think about it. And then the good thing about that is you can then move them around and actually restructure it in such a way, either to play around until you're actually happy with a structure, or to save different structures, so you can have different multiple versions of the same song, all in different structures. If you're doing remixes, or if you're just wanting to play around with different ideas and then take them away, and then you can have a listen at a later date and decide which one you like the best. So it's really handy to actually start to label things within the session view, and I think we'll continue with the session view for the purposes of these videos for the time being, because it's such an easy way to start off, and you'll actually start to get to see how you can move these loops and these sounds around and really have a lot of fun with it. So I'm just going to start off by renaming certain sections of the song, just so we can start to build up a bit of structure. So we might call this the intro. And we're going to go for a traditional song structure to begin with, just as an illustration of how this might work. The next bit might be the verse. Then you might have a chorus. You might then go back to another verse if you're working through a kind of a traditional pop rock song structure. You're probably then going to go back to another chorus. Oops, let's just change that. Oh dear. And then I think I'll drop in a middle 8 into that bit here, which is probably going to be a guitar solo or something of that ilk. And then we'll have a final chorus. I'm having problems spelling the word chorus this morning. Chorus. And then some sort of ending there. And I'm really just starting to get a loose structure for the song together, and also to give you an idea of how you build up the song. So how that then works with this area is you might have, for example, some drums on this track. You might have a bass synth on that track, and this is an audio track, so this is set up for information that's being recorded directly in as a performance into the track. So I'm going to rename that as a guitar. In fact, let's call it a rhythm guitar channel. So you can just start to see how the different instruments would work in this view. So you might record a loop of drums into this box here. You might then record a synth pattern that will then loop into this box here, and then you might record a rhythm guitar part into this box here. And when you click on the arrow at this end for the intro section, it will basically loop those three boxes simultaneously together as a chunk of sound. And that will just keep looping round and round until you decide you want to stop it. You might then record further slight variations on those ideas on the next line for the verse. And again, you would trigger that by clicking on that triangle there. And similarly for the chorus. So you can see you can really start to build up the song using this view. It doesn't mean that you're stuck to necessarily flicking through or clicking through these sections in the order that we've got them here. You can actually dip in and out of the different sections. So you might want to start with the intro, but then you might want to dive into a middle 8, in which case you would click then on the middle 8, and you might then want to go back to a chorus, so you would click on the chorus section, and so on. So you really have a lot of flexibility using the session view window when you're building up the track. And I personally found it very useful when I first started out making music in Ableton to work in this fashion, because it really got you to think about song structure, and I think that's really helpful when you're first starting out. So just to say a little bit about the labelling of the instruments within Ableton and the sections of the song, I think it's really useful to label as you're going along. It's just handy and part of keeping on top of the administration of the song. And I know that sounds a little bit like doing work, but essentially what you're trying to do is order this in a user-friendly manner, and it's just helpful for you to be clear and have each bit clearly labelled, each section of the song clearly labelled down this side as you're working through it, so that you know what each bit corresponds to, and have each track labelled, because as you progress, you might end up with a song that has a significant number of these instrument channels or instrument tracks in it. You could have anything from 10 to 20 different instruments and sounds happening in the track. And similarly, in terms of the structure of it, you could actually end up with something quite complicated if it was a lengthier song that had a number of different sections. So really helpful, really handy to keep it labelled and do that as you're progressing as a matter of habit. And then it also saves you a big job at the end of the song as part of that kind of admin. Okay, so we're going to now take a detailed look at each of the instrument tracks, and I'm just going to close down this bottom section again, just so that's out of the way, just to make this a bit easier. So you'll see with each of these instrument tracks, or each of these instrument channels, that there's a lot of different things happening in these at the bottom. We've talked a little bit about the blocks at the top and how these constitute the different loops of sound that you're going to be recording into it. But you've also got some things at the bottom. You don't have them on the MIDI tracks yet because you haven't dropped an instrument in, so we'll just leave those for the time being. You'll see that they don't have as many features or parameters at the bottom here. But with the audio track, you've got a number of buttons and a number of aspects to it. So obviously you've got this sliding scale here which responds to the volume of the track, and this is measured in decibels. And we'll talk a little bit about decibels later on, but you'll see something very similar, if not pretty much exactly the same, in the master track here and in the sends channels, where you've also got a volume slider here, and the numbers down the side relate to the number of decibels that you're working in. And so you can control the volume of each individual instrument channel, and then all of that feeds into the master channel through the return channels, and then you can control the master volume, which is an amalgamation of all the volumes that are going into the master channel. The other useful things to mention in the instrument channel tracks are the yellow button here with a number on it. That's your track number, and you can arm or disarm that. So if you turn that yellow button off, you're actually muting the track. So as you're working through it, you might want to do a particular mix of a certain section of the song. You might want to drop some of the instruments out so you can hear the other instruments more clearly. So that's useful for that. You also have a solo button that you click, and if you click on that it turns blue, and that means you can just solo that track and just hear that particular track. And then finally the button at the end is your arm button, and this is what you would click if you were going to start recording into it. So if you're going to record some guitar into the rhythm guitar channel, you would click on that and it would arm the track, and that means that anything that you then played into that would automatically be captured when you start recording it. So if that's off, you can safely mess around and work within the track without worrying about recording over anything or recording anything new into the track. But if it is armed, you're primed for that performance to actually go in and capture that sound, that instrument, guitar, vocals or whatever that you're recording at that point in time. Above that, this circle here is your pan, so you can pan the sound to the left speaker or to the right speaker or the right side of the mix, or you can keep it dead center. And this is handy because traditionally when you're working with certain sounds, there are things that you need to keep panned centrally, but then everything else pretty much you need to think about its place in the mix and where you would position it. And so panning is a really useful tool to create space in the sound. And then above that you have the sends tracks. Now this corresponds to how much of the sound is going to be pushed through into your return tracks here. So if you remember, we talked about the two return channels as part of mixing and production, and you have particular effects in the returns channels, and you know that might be a bit of reverb or a bit of delay, or it might be other things like some modulating effects such as chorus or phaser or something like that. So this is how you control how much of that particular effect is actually feeding into the sound that you have in that particular instrument. So you can control the level of reverb that's going in on, you know, for example, if you turned up the panel A, or you can control the amount of delay that's going in as it's currently set up if you turn up the parameter on the B channel. So those are the sends sections. That just gives you an idea of the bottom of the track and what you're working with. In terms of the other areas of Ableton that you're going to find useful, I kind of see this as 4 sections. So you have the top left hand buttons and features. You then have a couple of sections in the middle, and then you have the top right buttons and features here. And they all do different things, and some of them only relate to the arrangement view, and some of them can be used in both. Um, there's some really useful things in this top section, so we'll just go through it bit by bit. So in the top left hand section, you'll see that you've got a number 120 here. That relates to the beats per minute of the track, so you can actually alter that by just hovering over it and dragging the mouse up and down. You can change the beats per minute of the particular track. So that's helpful to change if you want to create a particular kind of track within a particular kind of genre. Dance tracks tend to be a higher BPM. If you're doing something which is a bit more rocky, then you might want to lower the BPM. It really does depend on the kind of genre that you're working in. But we're going to do a rock track, so it's going to be a little bit slower. So I'm just going to set this down to about 90 BPM, which is going to be quite a heavy, relatively slow, riffy rock track, and we're just going to set that like that. But you can press the tap button and actually tap in your own tempo. That's another option available to you if you wanted to if you had a beat in your head, you just wanted to get that down, you weren't quite sure what the BPM is, then that would be the best way of tackling that. These two buttons relate to when you want to temporarily increase or decrease the tempo. So these are probably not something you're going to touch if you're creating a standalone track, but one of the features of Ableton is that you can actually use it as a DJ to drop in multiple tracks, and so you might want to use these to change the tempo of a track to drop into another track or song to manage that difference in tempo between the two tracks. The 4/4 relates to your time signature. We'll keep it as 4/4 for this purposes of this song because it's a standard kind of rock time signature. And then the last two features in this bit are what's known as your metronome. So this gives you an inbuilt beat that you can turn on and play along to. So this is really helpful if you don't want to put the drums down initially. You want to maybe start off by recording a guitar or another instrument, but you still need a beat to play along to make sure you don't go out of time. So you would drop in the metronome, and as you see, there are lots of different settings that you can have for the metronome in this section. You can determine how fast it is, and you can determine how many bars it kicks in it starts off with before you actually go in and record. In the middle section, the way to think about this middle section at the top is it's almost like the buttons that you'd have on an old school tape recorder. So this is really what you use to control playing the song, stopping the song, recording onto the song, finding a position in the song to start recording at or to start playing back. This button here, if you click on that, it's the follow button. So what that means is that if you've got a long piece of music, and this really relates to the arrangement view. So if I just click across to the arrangement view, you'll see what I mean. So if you're playing in arrangement view and you click on that button, it will automatically keep up with that section of the music that's currently being played. This is particularly helpful if you've got a long piece of music and you're not necessarily going to fit it all on a single page. Or alternatively, you can manually overtype on this section. So you could go to bar 20, and it'll automatically start from that point. So you've got a positioning, you've got a section here that you can use to position where you start the track. That's your start button, start the music. That's your stop button, and that's your record button. So if you want to record live into the song, you would arm the track. Remember we looked at arming the track with that circular button there, and then you would start recording using that, and that is pretty much then the track is starting to record and you're capturing anything that you input into the track at that point in time. Some other useful buttons are the plus button is if you've got some notes that you've put into the music. This is for what we would call MIDI notes, so this relates to a MIDI channel, and you click on that. it enables you to lay additional notes on top of the ones that you've already recorded in. So it's really handy if you've done a recording, captured some notes, you're playing that back, you haven't quite captured all the notes you wanted to put in there, so you press that plus button and you can add additional notes on top. I'm not going to worry too much about the next three buttons for the time being, but this final button here is something that you're going to be using a lot in the session view, which we're in at the moment. If you remember, we talked about the session view being a useful way of capturing different mixes. So let's just say you've built up a song using the approach we talked about earlier, the building blocks of loops of sound, and you've structured it. You're then going to want to capture it as a particular take, because as we discussed, there's flexibility in terms of how you go about playing it. You can move around the different sections, but you're going to want to cement a particular version. So in doing that, you would click on that button and that would live record the session take that you're playing through as you flick through these different loops, these different samples and these different sections that you've got laid out here. So we talked about multiple takes. That's your way of doing that. And if you record on that button in the session view, it will automatically map out an arrangement in the arrangement view. So you will automatically get that version of the song that you've played through in the session view as a fully formed song, linear song, in the arrangement view. The next middle section is a loop mechanism, and this is used for the arrangement view. So if you go into the arrangement view, you'll see that you've got a little couple of flags here that you can hover over certain sections of the music, and this basically tells Ableton to repeat that section of music over and over. And if you click on that middle button, it will loop that section over and over again. So that what this is essentially telling you is that it starts at bar 22, which is right here, and that it goes on for 14 bars through to, what would it be, bar 35, I think that's bar 35. Bar 36, I think. So you can loop it. That's really useful again if you want to just repeat a section of the song over and over. So really helpful if you're mixing, you want to check the sound levels, or if you want to record a section of music and you just want to do multiple takes of it, capture each take, then you can use that as a tool to do that. Or if you just want to play in an instrument over a particular section. But as I said, that's predominantly used for the arrangement view, but very helpful if you're working in that view. And then finally, in the top right hand corner, you have a number of buttons and functions that you need to have set up. And these are to help you with how you are playing in notes into Ableton to capture MIDI information. So this doesn't relate to audio information that you're recording in, such as a guitar or vocals or an instrument that you've got set up through a microphone that you're playing as a live performance. These relate to capturing what we call virtual instruments, MIDI information, where you're going to need to tell Ableton what notes to play, and then Ableton will then push the sound, the particular sound that you've selected for that instrument, through those notes, and it will come out and play back that almost in the way a computer interprets information and tells you what it's hearing, basically. So in terms of putting those notes in, we'll do further videos where you'll see exactly how you can actually tell the computer what notes to play when you are dealing with MIDI tracks. But you've got a couple of different options with that. So you may or may not have what's known as a MIDI controller, and this is a special kind of keyboard that you plug into your computer that enables you to play notes into Ableton in the same way that you play a piano. So a MIDI controller looks like a piano, but it doesn't work as a standalone instrument. It needs to be plugged into a DAW, digital audio workstation like Ableton, in order to work properly, because it is relying on the virtual instruments in Ableton to tell it what sound to play. But if you press the keys on a MIDI keyboard, it will capture the notes that you're playing, and then obviously it will look to see what instrument you have in that particular instrument track, and it will play those notes back through that particular instrument. And so you're going to get very different sounds. You know, you might have a piano instrument that you've loaded into the track, in which case you're going to get quite an organic, natural piano sound potentially. Alternatively, you might have a bass synthesizer instrument set up in that track, and so the notes that you're going to play back through that might be something a little bit different, more akin to what you might hear on a dance track or an electronic piece of music. You know, there might be effects on those notes. They might be slightly distorted or have some sort of effects applied to it to really make the sound different and exciting and vibrant. So if you are using a MIDI keyboard or a MIDI controller, then you need to make sure you have this button here ticked and armed, and that showing as yellow. You do have the option, however, if you don't have a MIDI controller or a MIDI keyboard, to simply draw the notes in through Ableton. This is a bit more laborious, but I think there are people out there who do this and don't actually bother with a keyboard, and they've got really good and quite quick at actually doing it that way. And I'll show you how to do it through each of those different routes in a later video. But I'd always keep both of those ticked as yellow or clicked on as yellow for the time being, so that you can cover both angles. And then the final two buttons here, the key and the MIDI buttons, are for setting up your MIDI keyboard or your computer keyboard to map certain functions in Ableton to the MIDI keyboard or the computer keyboard. So essentially you can have those set up so that if you press a button it triggers a certain thing in Ableton. So really useful if you're doing a live performance and you actually want to capture that performance and do things quickly without necessarily flicking through menus, etc, etc. So again, I will do a future video on how you can go about setting that up. You don't need it set up to create and finish a song in Ableton. It's just something useful to have if you want to put little shortcuts in there, or if you're actually looking to do a live performance. So in the session view, if you're looking to capture it almost like a live DJ performance, then you might want to map certain functionalities in Ableton to either of those keyboards to speed up that process as you're going through that particular performance, that particular take. So that's the end of the video. Those are the main features of Ableton. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you have enjoyed it, have liked the content, please like the video and subscribe. Please also check out Speakerstack's Music Online. There are videos on the YouTube channel which very much document the journey that I've been through in developing music, and I'm hoping that they're getting better with every video, every song that I produce. And I also have some of my own material out there on iTunes, Spotify, and Amazon Music, and the usual suspects around that as well. And a word on those songs that are out there on those formats are fully mastered songs that have been sent to a mastering engineer. I think with the work that we're doing on Ableton with these videos, what we're aiming to do is really produce semi-professional, high-quality demos that you would then still need to send to a mastering engineer to get them really refined and fully produced and releasable as music that you could stream online. But you can get some fantastic semi-professional demos out of Ableton, which you can still post online, and some of the examples of those are on the YouTube channel. So thanks again for listening, and I'll see you in the next Speakerstack video.